Hey everyone, welcome to this on-demand session of Email Camp. Really excited to be a part of this year's 2023 Email Camp Mission Control. I think it's such an awesome theme, and the presentation that we're going to be discussing today is Cosmic Time Warp, Infusing 1960s Billboard Magic into Email Marketing Success. And basically, what we're going to do is just kind of take a step back in time into like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and kind of go through some of those marketing successes and things that really worked when billboards and out of home advertising really started to take off. And then how can we take some of those successes and then infuse them back into today's world, 2023, and specifically into email marketing, and how we can really just accelerate and make our email marketing a little bit more successful by infusing things from over a century ago. So, today I'm your presenter here, and my name is Brenly McCulloch. I'm currently the head of marketing at PayProp in North America. And, I'm a lifelong marketer. I've been in marketing, my entire career, really focusing on things like consumer behavior and kind of like economics and things of that nature. So, yeah, just really, really excited to dive into this. I love going and taking things that used to work in the past and bringing them into today, and what's really motivating consumers to take action, and all of that consumer behavior kind of things, and bringing that into marketing. And so over the past 3 years, I've been in B2B marketing specifically. Before then, mostly B2C. And so, last year, my team and we executed on an email marketing strategy that drove over $54 million in pipeline alone. So we really got hands-on, and we sent millions of, emails, and really got hands-on with a lot of A/B testing and trialing a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about today. And we used a lot of these tactics that I'll be discussing today, and as part of that success that we achieved last year. And so, now I'm head of marketing at PayProp North America. It's a prop tech SaaS company. And essentially now I'm building an inbound email marketing strategy from the ground up, leveraging these strategies that you'll be learning today. So these are a lot of my findings that I've studied over like the last year, and have actually tested them and tried them out. And hopefully you will find them to be beneficial in your email marketing endeavors as well. So four steps for our agenda today. First, we'll be talking about how billboards got their start. Then we'll be discussing billboards of the early 1900s, and then we'll kind of go into the Highway Beautification Act of 1965 and kind of how that changed things up a little bit, added regulation. We'll pull some comparables to how email marketing got started about 2 decades ago, a little more than 2 decades ago, and how it really took off over the last decade. And then when we have all these CAN spam acts and all these data privacy regulations coming into place, so we can draw comparisons between how billboards began to be regulated in the 60s, and then how email marketing is becoming, regulated over the last, few years, especially with all the data privacy things. And then I'll leave you with 4 takeaways. So 4 things that we can adopt from billboard advertising, out-of-home advertising, specific things that you can leverage specifically in things like your subject lines to help you get more opens and, basically promote whatever business and email marketing strategies and things that you're doing in your line of work. So let's talk about how billboards got started. So billboards effectively have been around, truthfully, for a very long time. And it dates even as far back as like hieroglyphics and Egyptians, and how they would etch different kind of things into stone and such like that. So that's kind of like the first attributable thing to like billboards and like advertising, kind of like making announcements, promoting something more than just like communication, but truthfully more of like a billboard and communicating to the masses for people to see. And that's really how it truthfully got started. But we'll specifically kind of put ourselves into like the early 1800s, where billboards as we know it today in 2023, how that's really shaped up. So how it really all got started in terms of how we know it to be, really would be attributed to the Industrial Revolution, which started in the late 1700s and kind of peaked its way in the early 1800s. And the invention of the lithographic printing process really accelerated how these billboards were put up. And throughout the 1700s, it would be common where billboards would be kind of like painted onto sides of buildings, painted onto different areas. Maybe there would be some of these posters, and you'll see that a lot. Billboards in the early 1800s were more or less called bill posting. So bill posting, and that's kind of how it derived into like bill posters and then billboards, because they started to put them up onto these large boards, and that's kind of how the name derived from. But they really started with like these posters, where people would either paint on them or draw on them, and then they would put these up throughout the public. And then in the early 1800s, kind of like right at the tail end of the 1700s, with the Industrial Revolution, this lithographic printing process was invented, which now allowed posters and things to be duplicated in masses, where before everything would have to be hand painted, hand drawn, whatever the case may be. Now those can be copied in color, multiple times. And that really spiked, this process called bill posting, where now you could, have multiple copies of these things and put it all throughout the public. And it really just accelerated, like I said, the movement of bill posting and billboards. This is like the start of, how we know it. So the first modern billboard that we know. So when we think of bill posting, you can kind of think of, kind of paper, like letter size paper, 11 inches by 17 inches, more or less, kind of in that, size of, paper, like how these posters would be made. So the first modern billboard, like I said, how I went from bill posting, bill posters to billboards as we know it, started here in 1835, by a man named Jared Bell, and he created a 50 square foot poster for the Ringling Brothers circus. So circuses were one of the big forms of entertainment in the early 1800s, and so these bill postings were very common to promote like shows and promote entertainment beyond just brands and things like that. That was never the initial thought of bill posting. It was always to make announcements or draw crowds, and attract people to come to a thing, to like take an action. And then over time, it derived into like brand awareness campaigns and these other big companies doing these billboards to promote their services, or just their brand in general, brand awareness as we know it today. So 50 square feet is pretty large. Effectively, it would be somewhere like, let's say you can think of it like a 10-foot wide by 5-foot tall kind of a size. So yeah, almost the size of like a really small, if you think of like a really small bedroom, maybe like half of the wall of a small bedroom wall, if that makes sense. So that's give you a sense of kind of like how big this was. And effectively that's just built up of a lot of posters, a lot of bill posters. And they're all just kind of like next to each other, to build this whole thing. So over time, the lithographic printing process allowed for larger mediums and, larger posters to be printed on. But in the early days, it was just a bunch of these smaller ones kind of stacked together. So this is really like the first billboard as we know it, the first massive scale of a, advertisement as we know it today. So here's a few other kind of examples, and just kind of like going through this timeline in the early 1800s, mid 1800s. You can see here in the top left, like Coca-Cola, as I said, brands started to pick up on this and realize it was a great way to promote like brand awareness and things of that nature. And they would be painted on the walls of buildings. That's truthfully how it got started, along with, like I said, printing on the posters and such like that. But this painting method was really like the most common way, because you can paint right directly onto a side of a building and it would stay. It'd be like a kind of like a permanent touch to it, unless it was painted over. And then bottom left there, you can see someone actually painting onto a kind of like of a canvas per se. So that's kind of where things were. And truthfully, towards the end of the 1800s, that is, I think it was in about the 1870s, 1880s, is when associations started to form, and there were agencies, as we know it today, that would broker these deals for brands and businesses to place their advertisements on the sides of their building. Okay, so that's kind of where it all got started. People would have all these buildings and they'd have like these massive, areas that are seen by a ton of people who are just, walking through the streets, public areas. And then there was prime opportunity for leases to be brokered between brands and these building owners so that they can put their message in like right there to be seen by a ton of people. And so that kind of started towards like the late 1800s. And then here you can see these billboard advertisings just kind of went out of control towards the late 1800s. Really got out of control, where they were like building up like vertically spaces, like white spaces, for brands to put these advertisements onto like the building. So if you had a building and it started to become a little bit lucrative for just advertisements to be, like I said, brokered to be put on your building, people would like build these things up on top of their buildings. And you can see here like 3 stacks high. And then they would broker these deals, and brands would print these posters to be put onto those spaces for a period of time, as we know how that works today in billboard advertising. So yeah, like I said, it really got out of control. There were advertisements everywhere. Everywhere you walked, it was all up in your face. And that's kind of similar to what we know email marketing has kind of turned into over the last 10 years, especially, before 2012 per se. Email marketing was super successful, super lucrative. Your inbox wasn't too cluttered. It wasn't much of a thing. And then as the last decade, started to progress, things really started to take off, and brands really started to use email marketing, up and even through like the last few years. There was a period where people thought it would like die out. Wasn't as successful, but that's just not as true as we know it. So email marketing is still very much successful, just as billboards today are still very successful as well. But this kind of shows you the comparisons between like billboards and email marketing, how it once started as like a small thing and was very successful. And, things started to kind of like build up around it. Associations were built, agencies were built to like, design these billboards and broker these deals. Same for email marketing. Over the last decade, email marketing agencies have become a thing. I'm sure a lot of you watching this now probably have an agency, or maybe you're a freelancer, or whatever the case may be, where you're making money writing emails, copywriting emails for other people. So the same comparison. And then now, instead of in a world where there was very few advertisements on sides of buildings, now there was a ton of billboard advertisements being put up. Same for email marketing. Inside of the inbox, there's tons and tons of emails all over the place. And essentially the comparison I like to draw is, I viewed the email inbox as literally how this is in the late 1800s, a bunch of little billboard lines inside of an inbox. And so how do you stand out? So if you look at the picture in the bottom right, how are your email subject lines and things like that going to stand out inside of an inbox that literally looks like that? It's pretty congested. And so that's kind of some of the things that we'll learn about today. So now let's kind of turn the century and go into the early 1900s. This is where billboard advertising, like I said, we just talked about the late 1800s, early 1900s. This is where billboard advertising really started to pick up steam. There was a lot more, brands who were wanting to advertise through this medium. There was a lot of just, I guess, like overall, like the economy was kind of like turning up. There was just tons and tons of opportunity for brands wanting to be in front of people. And at the time, billboard advertising was truthfully like the number one medium to, put your message in front of people where everyone would see. And so here you'll see where not just like sides of buildings, but like this is a structure that was actually like built. So like they would build these structures onto the ground, like on the sides of the roads. So they were putting these things everywhere. Everywhere you turn, there was just messaging everywhere. Kind of overwhelming, but it was very lucrative, and that's how they're able to promote like things like entertainment. But you also see some like different kinds of brands and stuff like that as well. So this is one of my favorite quotes when it comes to like billboards, but more specifically, we're drawing comparisons to email marketing. This is how I view email marketing. Anytime that we're building email campaigns and we're thinking about, how are we going to build this campaign or nurture sequence or drip campaigns, whatever the case may be. These are the four things I always try to keep in my mind. I have this like kind of printed out and kind of sticky notes, and I always kind of remind myself all the time. It's a quote from Leo Burnett, who had an agency through the early and mid 1900s. He founded his own agency. I'm pretty sure it's still active today, just called Leo Burnett Company or something. But he said, make it simple, make it memorable, make it inviting to look at, make it fun to read. And so those are the principles that really made a lot of his campaigns successful. And those are the things I think about in email marketing today. So I don't want to overcomplicate email subject lines. I want to keep them really simple. I want to keep it memorable. So whenever they are scrolling through, whatever hits their eyes, I want them to remember that. And I've built a handful of campaigns over the last 2 years that specifically are built. I like to call them like zero click emails, which seems kind of counterintuitive, right? You send an email so people can open it and then click on the email or click on the message that's inside of it. So I derived this concept over the last year and a half, 2 years of like just zero click emails, and I want to create emails that are just memorable. And basically, that would be from the sender. So what's that sender name? So keeping that consistent so people remember who's sending them something into their inbox, not just changing that up all the time. And then the subject line, making that something that reminds them of something. That's a brand impression. So if I can associate the sender name to whatever that text is, effectively you could send emails daily or multiple times a day, as long as it's you're just putting your advertisement, kind of think of it as a billboard. You're just putting it up there onto that big wall of billboards to be able to see. And so basically I would write subject lines that are like billboard headlines, and if they click on it, hey, great, there's content inside for them to take action on. But even if they don't, did they walk away remembering the brand? Did I achieve a brand impression by sending that email to them? So it's just another way to kind of think about the emails that you're sending and how you're writing those subject lines. Third, make it inviting to look at. So whether this is with subject lines or the actual email body, is it inviting to look at? Is it modern? Is it updated? Is it something that people want to read and things like that? Can they skim through it? Is it not, you don't want to send emails that are thousands, of words, or even, hundreds of words, truthfully. Like, is it inviting to look at? Is the format of the email inviting to look at? Same with the subject line. Obviously you don't want to use like all caps or, use all this other language. It's not really inviting to look at. So I kind of view the art of subject lines. Like, how can I create the subject line where literally all you can use are, characters, maybe even emojis too. And like, that's the form of art that you're writing. And then make it fun to read. So you want to make your emails fun to read, your subject lines fun to read. How can you put different things into those subject lines where when people see your emails, they want to click on it because they know that content inside is going to be fun to read. So this is just a quote from him that I just really love and try to keep in mind whenever I'm writing emails. So early 1900s. Here's a few examples of how things started to progress and brands really started to take advantage of it. The size of the billboards as we know it today really took effect. And we saw these all over the highways as highways started to be built and formed, and people had access to automobiles and stuff. Early 1900s, mid 1900s, that whole area. Things really started to take off, especially with like brands, and they would use very, like I said, billboards that were inviting to look at, billboards that were easy to read, and they really kind of stuck to what I've noticed in a lot of billboards, things that had about just 2 or 3 words, maybe 4 words in those sections. So you can see big refreshment value, king size Coke, after every meal, good for teeth, fine for breath, aids digestion. All of those are like great subject lines to use. They're 2 or 3 words. they kind of lean you in for a little bit more. You've got a little bit of context, but also a little bit of mystery in there. Lucky in love, reach for a lucky. Then down there in the bottom right, I put this one in there. This is outdoor advertising agency, and they said, to make a long story short, outdoor advertising. So that's effectively what these billboards did, and I like to think of that for email subject lines as well. To make a long story short, email marketing. Not to make a long story longer, email marketing. It's make a long story short, email marketing. And so how can you take what you're trying to communicate and distill that down and make a short story out of it? Obviously, you can't always use like images in that subject line area, but you could use things like emojis, or truthfully, if you just use words, how can you tell a story in a few words and allow people to visualize what that image would look like? So, like I said, if we just saw one that just subject line said big refreshment value, in your mind, you can already kind of picture. Coca-Cola's branding is so good, you might instantly associate refreshment with Coke. And so if Coca-Cola were to be doing email marketing nowadays, and I'm sure they do, maybe I'm just not subscribed to it. But inside of the inbox, if they were to send daily emails, things like big refreshment value, or even like king size Coke, it has their brand name in it, things like that. It's just another brand impression to put in someone's face. And I don't, if there's a subject line, and even if it said from Coca-Cola and the subject line was big refreshment value, I instantly know it's just a brand. I don't even need to open it. Like it became memorable in my head as I'm scrolling through my inbox. Even if I delete it, archive it, whatever it is, that was a brand impression achieved. And that's really what I'm going for with email marketing, are brand impressions. And then you basically have a whole email marketing funnel, and that's the point of the funnel. Like initially you're going for brand impressions, and you just want that to be in front of people's face, brand impressions. And when people go wrong with this, are they send like these really spammy kind of emails, or really long subject lines, or they're very salesy. Notice Coca-Cola never tells you to go to the store and buy a Coke, or, they're a B2C brand, but it's never like salesy. It's always like the benefits of their product, refreshment, and ice cold, and share a Coke, all these great campaigns that they always did. It was never really salesy. And so oftentimes in the B2B, we always say that B2B is 5-10 years behind B2C, and in this case I think it's almost 50 to 100 years behind. And there's a lot of ways that we can use, if you're specifically in B2B, how can you kind of communicate those feelings and stuff that your product has just through subject lines? And then through the email marketing funnel, you can then, share a glimpse into, more of like what your product does. So initially you're just going for impressions. That's the KPI for top of funnel. We just want impressions. We're just sending these out and we just want impressions. That's the goal. And maybe alternatively, you look for unsubscribes too. Keep unsubscribes low, and then make sure it's just hitting people's inbox, looking at inbox deliverability, things like that. You obviously want to make sure that they're seeing it. Then towards middle of funnel, you want to focus on those opens. How many people are opening the email to see more of what we have, and maybe even clicking on things. Then bottom of funnel are those actions. Like when they click, are they submitting a demo request? Are they purchasing our product, or whatever the case may be? And that's the way I derive like the email marketing funnel nowadays. But these are just a few examples of like how billboard advertising really got it right in the 1900s, and how we can take away a lot of this stuff. And just keep in mind, make a long story short, email marketing. It's not to make a short story long or a long story longer. Long story short, use email marketing. So now let's quickly touch on Highway Beautification Act, 1965. This is the comparison I draw to how like CAN-SPAM acts and all these data privacy stuff is coming up. So if you can see in this image on the roads and stuff, literally these billboards would be everywhere. I'm not joking. Go and Google search a lot of these images. It's kind of astonishing, like how they were just everywhere. Like imagine driving on the highway and just having like a wall of billboard advertising the entire way that you're driving. That's literally what they were doing. And it was causing a lot of issues. Obviously, to have that many advertising, like the highways did not look that great, and the roads didn't look that good in the U.S. So the first regulation was signed in 1965, called the Highway Beautification Act, which primarily targeted things like billboard advertising and how to like clean all this stuff up, apply some regulation to it in terms of like sizing, so things aren't distracting, causing wrecks and different stuff like that. But also just to make the roads look better, and versus having all these advertisements everywhere. People are just building this stuff up everywhere, and so that was signed in 1965 by Lyndon B. Johnson. And like I said, it just basically just controlled the interstates and primary highways just by limiting the number of like billboards and stuff that were showing up. And then it required the states to set the regulation of like size, lighting, spacing, how far apart they needed to be, things like that. So many thought that this was officially the end. This was the end of email, or I'm sorry, of billboard, advertising, and this was the most popular advertising medium there was. And like this officially was the end. Obviously, we started to see the rise of like television advertising, radio advertising, and a lot of mediums like that. So billboard advertising was already kind of like taking a dip in terms of maybe like effectiveness or usefulness, per se, because there's other mediums around. And so people thought like, yep, this is officially the end of billboard advertising. But truthfully, companies just adapted and adjusted to the new regulations and kept moving on. And here we are, billboards are still a thing, and still a very effective medium of advertising. So the same thing with email marketing. Email marketing was super successful. Then there became a lot of other different kinds of mediums, social media marketing, things like that. And so people really thought that email was kind of like taking a dip, and now we have text message marketing and stuff. And when can spam came out, and a lot of updates to that act, and a lot of other different kinds of regulations, and data privacy rules, especially over the last few years of like iOS data privacy stuff, where people have really thought like, oh, that's the end of email marketing. But through the I guess themes that we can draw from all advertising mediums is that it always adapts, right? It always adapts. So as much as we think in our heads of like, oh, the data privacy stuff won't allow us to track opens or clicks and stuff like that, and I imagine it's only going to get more strict over the next few years. That doesn't mean that email marketing is dead. All that really means is for you to adopt an email marketing funnel, as I described, of putting emails in people's inboxes that are inviting to look at as your top of funnel medium. Like there's no metric that you need to track for that, other than just like deliverability. Like, is it going into their inbox? Yes. Okay, good. That's all I need to worry about. And so really all this does is prove the need to transition a strategy towards inbox deliverability and making sure your emails are showing up in the inbox and capturing that brand impression, whether they open it, click it or not, who cares? Top of funnel strategy should really start to derive towards that area. So 4 things to adopt. I'll leave you with these 4 things, and we are done here. Hopefully, you've captured a lot of great insights or new perspectives on email marketing so far. But I want to give you 4 tangible things that you can do, specifically like in your email subject lines. Okay, so number 1, condense some more. So remember how I said like to make a long story short, here's like a really cool billboard I saw from Chipotle. And the long story is we wanted to write about our locally sourced natural ingredients, but short billboard headlines are better. And then in bold, it says our ingredients are better. Like great advertisement. Like all great advertisements are about 2, 3 to 5 words. Like that's so I just call it like my rule of 5. Like every subject line I send out has to be 5 words or less. Like that's just like a minimum. Like all the billboards that you've seen don't have like these long stories, like how this one here would be. So make a long story short. And sometimes that's hard. You've got a lot of things that you want to communicate, but really focus on taking long stories, condensing them down, making them short. So I always look at the emails I write or subject lines I write. That's how your subject line literally looks. And then can you use brevity to like chop that down and then just say our ingredients are better. Leave it at that. Keep moving. So number 2, create pattern interrupts. So I've seen this a lot in like email subject lines where maybe they would use like a series of 3, and like the third thing would be like massively different. So it could be like maybe you're advertising some kind of service. Maybe let's say that you're an agency and you're advertising your services for something. You would then use like 3 words. So you could say something like, see, social media, email, and um, I don't know, chocolate cake. Something like that. Like something that's just like way like out of the box. Like what does social media, email, and chocolate cake have to do with anything? And then that draws you in, right? It piques your interest. It's a pattern interrupt just by like scanning through the inbox and seeing stuff like that. So it's really important to like focus on crafting the subject line, because if your subject line is no good, obviously they're never even going to read what's inside of the email that you really spend most of your time writing instead of focusing on the subject line. So pattern interrupts like that. Here's a cool billboard from IKEA of how they kind of do that. You look at it and it's kind of funny because it ties into what they do. A lot of times you build IKEA furniture and it's like out of place. And even the messaging ties right into that of like, our assembly service is happy to help. It's a pain point building IKEA. Like this is like such a great billboard here where they just kind of like moved the tiles around. So kind of infuse a lot of humor and relevancy to what they do. So number 3, spark controversy, spark curiosity, along those lines. This is actually a billboard that this is Netflix's billboard. I'm pretty sure, which says Netflix is a joke. And it kind of just ties into like, I think this is around the time where they released a lot of comedy specials. They started doing like those Netflix exclusive comedy specials where they would put those out there, and they released a ton of those. So I think that's what this is the billboard they use to kind of advertise that. And it catches your eye, right? It's memorable. It's shocking. It's surprising. You look at it and you're like, and everyone kind of loves that controversy, right? You really love that. So you would think that a competitor put this out. But it definitely captures the brand awareness. You remember Netflix, right? It's like, I saw that billboard. Netflix is a joke. And then you're kind of wondering like why? And then eventually like you'll complete the loop and realize like, oh, there's comedy specials on there. That's why it's a joke. But kind of give people a cliffhanger. Use, no more than 5 words and kind of call something out. Call something out about yourself and your own services and your own company. Maybe something that's industry related, but just kind of call something out that'll really stand out and kind of spark that curiosity, that cliffhanger moment, or maybe something that's controversial. People love to read into that. So give them something to want to lean into. And then 4, write with the times. So, a lot of times we get caught up in email automation and we have these like subject lines and all this other stuff through drip campaigns and such. And a lot of times those can become outdated. And the subject lines that do the best are oftentimes the ones that you write like currently and that you're sending out. So, you leverage campaigns around different kinds of time periods in your industry, around different kinds of holiday themes, seasonal themes, such like that. That added relevancy, added, I guess, messaging around what's currently happening in the world. Just like with news and different things going on, watch your emails, watch your subject lines. I've seen it a ton of times where something tragic happens in the news, whether it's, something, in Ukraine, or whether it's something here in the US, or, whatever the case might be, tragic news. Or something with like schools, whatever the case may be. And then your subject line is kind of related, or maybe it plays a joke off of something, or maybe it, you're using that spark controversy kind of piece, but it's a soft spot. So just kind of watch out for those drip campaigns that are on autopilot, because you could really get caught up in a mess by having a subject line that pokes at a pain point or a sore spot with news happening and such. So I always love like creating campaigns that are very specific, watching the drip campaigns that you have, making sure that your content wouldn't cross any boundaries or lines and stuff. But yeah, just really kind of keep things themed and along those lines. And then finally, I'll leave you with a quote here. This is from David Ogilvy. When you have written your headline, you have spent 80 cents out of your dollar. And so that's why I say like the subject lines are so important. Billboard headlines were also so important. And it's just really critical. I think a lot of times people spend 80% of their time just writing the email. And then the subject line is just an afterthought of let me just write something. And then oftentimes you're in the mode of writing this email and then your subject line is just so long. I always recommend whether you start with the subject line or not, you can always write it after you write the email, but spend some time on it. Spend a good amount of time on it. Write out at least 5 different examples of subject lines that you could use for that email. Oftentimes, the first idea or two that you have for a subject line isn't that great. It's not until you get to that third, fourth, or fifth idea where you really have something that's great. Like I said, if people don't click on the subject line, they're never even going to read the email that you have. And if you're sending top of funnel emails focused on just brand impressions, if you don't really put thought into it and it's not memorable, it's not enticing, it's going to be forgotten. Or even worse, someone might view it as kind of spammy and they'll just unsubscribe completely. And then you lose that person forever. Very rarely do people resubscribe to something they've unsubscribed from. So you want to be kind of careful with that balance. So top of funnel stuff, keep it light, keep it refreshing. Don't be salesy. You really want to like hold their attention, create that relationship with them, and then move them down the funnel. And that'll help protect your unsubscribe rate, which would also help your deliverability and things along that nature. So, just remember 80 cents of your dollar spent on the headline or subject line. So just kind of be, mindful of that. And that's it. That's all I have for me. So thank you all so much. Feel free, scan the QR code. You can find, it's my website. You can find resources and different things that I talk about. I've got a newsletter and stuff like that where I kind of talk about and different kind of marketing things. So feel free to check it out, and hope to see you all in a future session. And yeah, it was great having you. Thanks, everyone.